Okay. Oh, okay, great. We can see it. Sorry for the delay, some technical issues on my side there. So welcome everybody, it's so great to be here. My name is Robert Sell, and I'll be talking today about the insider threat to corporations. And as you can see, I'm a big fan of the game Among Us. If you haven't played Among Us yet, I highly recommend it. Play it with your friends, have a few beers, and that alone is going to give you a quick insight into insider threats and how you can adapt to fit this circumstance. Oh, there we go. So a little introduction first about myself. My name is Robert Sell. I've been really blessed with my career to be able to do a number of different things that have actually given me exposure to insider threat at many different levels. So I'm the founder president of Trace Labs, which is a nonprofit organization. We do crowdsourcing for open source intelligence to help law enforcement find missing persons. And we've been doing that for a few years. It's been growing. We're at about 20,000 members now, which is great in our community. If you haven't done one of our CTFs yet, one of our OSINT CTFs, I highly recommend you take a look at that. It's a lot of fun. Do those pretty much every quarter now. Also, another volunteer opportunity that I do in search and rescue, so I'm a team leader. And I've been doing that over a decade. And as a tracker, it's very similar to doing open source intelligence operations, I find. So it's some really nice overlap there between the physical world and the virtual world. And then also my career in information security. Mostly I'm working in aerospace right now, but I've been doing a number of different things around the world, which has been really good. And insider threat has always been a component of this as I've moved through at different levels, right? And a couple pictures of me. One is in the helicopter, which is always a lot of fun in search and rescue. And the bottom is when I arrived in Australia, I checked into my hotel, turned on the television, and there I was with that title, Hackers Hunting Down Missing People, which is not always the title that you want associated with your picture on TV. So that was interesting. My contact information, should you need to reach me, I'm always looking for feedback on my presentations or questions would be great. Quick disclaimer, I always have to do this, so none of my opinions here are represent any past, present, future employers. For lawful use only, this is public information, of course, and I'm not going to cover every situation or scenario. I could go really deep. I could spend an hour on any particular slide, but of course we can't do that. But I am available after this. I'm here for a couple days, and then of course by email or LinkedIn or any of those communication methods. So the journey that I want to take you on today is kind of a 5-step process. One, to understand what the insider threat is all about, because I really think it's misunderstood to a pretty high degree. Then take a look at, okay, now we kind of understand what it looks like. How do we prevent it in our organizations? And then if it's very hard to prevent everything, so how do we detect it once it's in our organization? And then responding, and then finally a strategy. So I'm going to give you a final slide, a one-pager, that I think you could then take to your organization and say, hey, could we implement this? And that's going to be kind of your takeaway from this. So that's our journey today. So we're going to start off with understanding. And it starts off here, and I think there's a really poor understanding of information or insider threat. And this is a bad definition and I would say a better definition. And often they will say exploiting the vulnerabilities of the entity's security. Well, sometimes that's the case, but quite often it's not necessarily a vulnerability that's being exploited. And an intent to cause harm, which is also not always true. And I'm going to show you that. I'm going to show you the different levels and the different types of insider threat, because it varies. I think a better definition would be potential for an insider, because sometimes there's a bit of a combination there where they're recruited or leveraged, and there could be authorized access or an understanding of the organization. And then also there's different sort of payloads. There's malicious, complacent, and unintentional even, that they don't even know, right? Perhaps payload's the wrong word, but there are different attributes there. It's very, I think, nuanced when we look at this. I'm going to show you some of those nuances as we progress through this. So some statistics just to kind of realize why this is an important subject. So in the US, there was approximately 2,500 internal security breaches daily. That's a pretty big number, right? More than 34% of businesses around the globe are affected by insider threats yearly. So that means that if you haven't been impacted in the last 2 years, this could be your year. Over the last 2 years, the number of insider threats have increased by 47%. That's almost 50%, right? So that's pretty good. I mean, in a bad way. And while it's also increasing, the average cost is also increasing pretty dramatically, right? We see 31%. I like to look at these things as if they were stocks. If that was the return on a stock investment, we would all be running out of the room to buy these stocks, right? So those are significant numbers. This is not a good thing, that sort of growth, right? Both for cost and incidents. And then to compound on top of that, it's no longer just corporations or individuals. It's also nation states more and more, right? So what we're seeing here, and I recommend go look at this, Article 14, where we've actually taken the ability for nation states to say to entities and individuals and corporations, you are now a spy on behalf of us. And I know you could say, hey, Rob, well, any country could do this. Why are you picking on China? Yes, I agree. But it is easier if you are a dictatorship to enforce that, right? So I think that they have a little bit more ability in that regard, and we're seeing much more activity there. So some references there. I highly recommend you go take a look at that. I find that in particular is very interesting when we're looking at this problem. So types of insider threat. This is where we're going to get into some of the nuances. So we have different categories, and we have pawns, turncloaks, and imposters. Then within those categories, we also have different types. The accidental, the lazy, career, disgruntled, and then we get into the more serious ones. And then I'm going to look at intent and also triggered. And so intent is, did they mean to do it? Are they meaning to cause you harm? Because sometimes they're not. And then also, are they triggered? And by triggered, what I mean is there some sort of event that occurs within your organization that causes them to be an insider threat? Because as we can see here, almost more than 50% of the time, there's something that happens within your organization that allows this to occur, or actually even moves it towards it occurring, actually increasing the percentage chance that it's going to occur. And I think that's the magic here. I think if there's one thing you come away with, think about that as I progress through this presentation, because there's a lot of control that we have right there to stop insider threat by allowing them not to be triggered, to not be converted, right? And then, of course, the sophistication level, we have low, medium, and high. And you could say, hey, Rob, well, it varies, and it does, but generally, this is what it looks like, right? When we get up into the espionage area, you're getting into some really high sophistication levels. So we're going to start off kind of going through these pawns. These are the people that you would feel sorry for, right? There's definitely some innocence there. They quite often don't mean to cause the company harm. There's many, many examples of this out there, and it's often a mistake. They're often leveraged from an outside party. They will regret what they did. They'll be remorseful, of course, and they're often the victim here. So it's when this occurs, it's often, I think, to be considerate of the person, because there's going to be some emotional damage there, right? If you wire transfer $50 million by accident, that's a bad day for everyone, but the person who did it is particularly going to have a bad week, year, career, so be mindful of that. There's also the lazy component of pawns, right? So they're not always just the victim. Sometimes they just don't really care, right? So leave my laptop open in the airport so you can read all the proprietary data, toss my papers in the bin instead of shredding them, that sort of thing, right? So there's those two sides of the pawns. And but there's usually a trigger event here. So this could be a phishing email that they click on because they didn't get the training on not to click on all those links. It could be a disgruntled employee because they missed the promotion. We're looking at that sort of thing generally. Now, within the category of pawns, the first one is accidental. And this is the one that we're very familiar with. If you are attacking a company, so I did in Vegas, the SE Village twice. I did third 2 years in a row there, which I'm happy with. But that kind of taught me what kind of people you would approach in a company. The social butterflies, the people that I call them having the low wisdom but high charisma people, right? The people that post a lot of stuff online. Maybe they don't have a lot of user awareness training. Those are the people that you would go after, and these are quite often the victims here, right? The victims of social engineering, where they get a very legitimate looking email, they click the link, and now their computer is owned by an outside party. Another example would be where they wire transfer $50 million or whatever it may be, that sort of thing. So that's the first one. Would be an example of that. So I think most of you will remember this in the news. It was actually pretty amazing. Elon Musk was giving away bitcoins all of a sudden, so was Bill Gates. Kind of a weird coincidence, right? But this started off, and if you go in and read the details of this, this started off with a phishing attack with the employees of Twitter who gave their credentials to the people that then logged in and used their tools to do this. So yeah, just a simple phishing attack allowed that to occur. And this caused huge damage, and it really makes you wonder what their user awareness training is like there. Definitely probably was improved a lot after this event. But this is a good example of that accidental type. Now we're going to move into the lazy. These are the people that just don't really care. They can't be bothered. Unlike the accidental, they probably won't feel as remorseful. It's just like, why do I have to do this? And the other thing is, nobody's enforcing the policies here. So you may have a policy that says, don't open your computer on the bus or expose proprietary information or even talk about the secret project you're working on or things like that. But they're not paying attention. They don't care because nobody's enforcing that. So I think that's another very important thing that I'm going to emphasize as we progress through here is if you want this behavior to stop, you need to enforce policy, right? They're just not interested in it, and they obviously think it's not mandatory in that case, right? So this is the other side of pawns. This is an example of a lazy type of pawn, and this may not be the best example. You may find a better example, but I just couldn't resist putting this in here, where one of the most powerful computers, supercomputers in Russia, the person there figured it was going to be a good idea to mine Bitcoin with that. Just didn't care, right? Like, probably knew he was going to get caught, and of course the FSB quickly discovered him, and he's probably disappeared by now. But yeah, just incredible, right? Don't know how many Bitcoins he mined, but wouldn't be enough for that. And then I'll move us into turncloaks, which is the next category. Turncloaks are where pawns are victims. These are not, right? So these are more self-aware. They're not being victimized. They're not necessarily lazy. They have more of a purpose, right? So more of an intent. We're getting into kind of like 50-50 ratio of intent here. They won't necessarily show remorse. They're kind of on a bit of a more of a mission. And also there's usually a bit of a trigger event, such as maybe there's no policy enforcement like we saw with the pawns, or just low engagement. So again, these are internally influential things that companies can change, right, that we could actually do, and I'm going to show you more detail on that, to prevent turncloaks. An example of a turncloak would be the classic career turncloak. And we probably see this every day. I don't know about you, but being in an IT and information security for a long time, I remember the days when people would come to me and say, hey, Rob, can I have a blank CD? Very casual, and I knew as soon as they asked me that, oh, you're going to leave in 2 weeks. And you're going to back up all your stuff onto that CD or DVD, and I'm dating myself a little bit. Now it might be a USB drive or whatever, or just upload it to the cloud. You're going to leave in 2 weeks, and you're taking all your career stuff with you, and you're probably going to think halfway through, you know what? I should just take all the project stuff too, because I might use that in my next job. And that happens all the time. And I don't know how often your companies are looking at that and catching that, but I mean, that's a continual siphon of proprietary information, if not even more sensitive data, right? And these people often will show not any real remorse. They'll try to justify it and say, well, it's my data. No, it's not. Or, it's fine, no problem. I'm just taking what I did. They will kind of justify it in their minds that way, right? And basically kind of ignorant of the rules, not being reminded of the rules, and so they're just pulling all their data out of the company that way. That's a pretty typical career type turncloak. A good example of this, so this is taking the example and really going far with it. And there's actually an incredibly large amount of these out there. So this one takes all the data out, goes and actually starts their own self-driving truck company, right, which is then purchased by Uber, and then they're caught. And then Google says, whoa, wait a minute. So this is taking the journey very, very far, right? Not just, oh, I'm going to take all my project data, but has taken all the proprietary information to then go start a new company. It's bought, and now we have a huge lawsuit. So this kind of shows you where it can go. There's a huge amount of these examples. The disgruntled type of turncloak. And this is, again, internally influenceable, right? So we can prevent this. This one, again, is very dangerous, has intent to cause harm. This person's upset with the company, frustrated, and will really not show any remorse. There's very few times they're going to turn this person around once they're so far into their disgruntled state. They know the rules. They know the necessary actions to avoid detection. They've worked with the company for a long time. They're motivated by the desire to retaliate, right? So they're mad at your company. They may pretend to follow process while secretly kind of sabotaging things. Typical scenario is, distract people from working, reduce productivity, just be unproductive, and perhaps even engage in external threats, right? So these are the people that will possibly take the partnership with criminal organizations to introduce ransomware and things like that into your organization, right? So they're not happy with what they're doing. So these are definitely people that we want to watch out for, that we can identify, and that we could probably help to prevent this risk. Here's one of many, many, many examples of this, right? So this person was laid off. They still had access. They came in. They changed all the passwords on the routers, causing massive damage. They're going to go to jail. So they were caught. Not all of them are caught, of course, but there's many examples of this, right? And it's a shame because they're just not identified throughout that journey. So now we're going to get to imposters, and these are the more serious people of insider threat, and these are the people that are going to come into your organization and be highly sophisticated. You probably won't even know they're there. They might be a good friend. By design, that's probably where they want to position themselves. They're going to be very professional, carefully planned strategy, depending on what level they're in, what category here. Not emotional, so they're not going to get upset. They're not disgruntled. They're not lazy. They're not dumb, right? They're going to take a long time to get where they need to go, be very sophisticated and multifaceted. And unlike the pawns or some of the turncloaks, they're not triggered by any sort of internal thing. They're from the outside in, coming in to get what they need from your company. The first type that I'm going to start with here would be the malicious. So fully intent on causing harm, no remorse. Unlike the disgruntled, malicious are not really triggered. None of these are really triggered. Not really motivated by greed or self-gain. They really just kind of want to hurt the company. This could be, say, a whistleblower. Might be something, a good example of that, right? So if we look at Edward Snowden, and I have mixed emotions on Edward Snowden. I think, like many of you probably do, I respect what he's done for the world and the light that he's drawn on some of these activities. But at the same time, he's really hurt those organizations as well, right? And I think there's no denying that those organizations, if you talk to people in those organizations, they'd say, yeah, it definitely hurt my career, hurt the organization. So this one is very mixed emotions as far as what that looks like. But a good example, I think he's an iconic example of that, right? So he fundamentally disagreed with what they were doing. He collected information, took that information out, and then made that public. The next one, I kind of call this the Han Solo of insider threat, right? Han Solo from Star Wars, it was all about the money, right? For him, especially in the early movies. Just show me the money for doing what I need to do. He's a smuggler, right? So this is the pirate type. Fully intent on opportunities for profit, ransomware, right? That's probably the first thing you think of. No remorse. This is their standard MO. This is what they do all day long. No excuses. So very good at what they do, motivated by greed and personal gain, not interested in your policy, will pretend that they are, of course. And so a good example of this would be ransomware for payout, selling credentials, all that sort of stuff, right? So probably one of the lower sophistication levels of the imposters, but still very dangerous. This is a really good example. It's a good news story, this one. And so at Tesla, and I recommend you guys go look this one up, this kind of talks to the culture at Tesla. So the employee was approached by an external party, and they said, hey, do you want to make a lot of money? I think it was $500,000. Do you want to make $500,000? Pretty hard sometimes for people to say no to that. Just drop this ransomware in the company, and we'll cut you in. And so they were out having drinks. They were good friends, it looks like, and this came up. And so the employee of Tesla, rather than taking him up on that huge payout deal, actually reported him to police and to the internal company. And so that really says something about Tesla, I think. And I think Tesla gets attacked quite a bit that way. But they must have a pretty good culture as far as a protective culture, and then also pretty good user awareness training, I would expect, right? So really good story. That's an example of how a pirate might operate, recruiting people from the inside. Then the final example I've got here for, or type rather, is the espionage type for imposters. So fully intent on carrying out their mission. Of course, they know that it's going to cause harm, no remorse. Probably employed to actually infiltrate, right? So trained in escape and evade techniques, and really looking for how are they going to do that data exfil. And the multiple ways that they could be doing that. More often than not, we're seeing more nation-state stuff. Of course, there are still corporate actors and entities like that. But I think the real risk, if you are a larger company, is of course going to be nation-state activity. A good example of that is just data exfiltration without you ever knowing it, right, in various forms that could occur. Here's the classic example, right? So if you have weapons platforms or things that fly in the sky or anything like that, you're of course a huge target. Many examples like this where data is being pulled from the company and then sent somewhere else in various methods. So we've gone through all the categories and the types that I have listed here. You can see those in this chart, and we can also kind of see that which ones are triggered, which ones have intent. Pawns and turncloaks have triggers. An event occurs for most of them where they actually turn into threats, right? We kind of glimpsed over that. Pawns and some turncloaks have intent, which is important to know, and imposters are not triggered yet have intent. So it's an interesting dynamic there, and it kind of tells us where we can focus some of our energy for the biggest payoff. Now we're going to take a look at actually how we would prevent some of this activity. So there's the pawns, turncloaks, and imposters, and the focus is different for each group, of course, right? For pawns, really you can see here that most of the focus is just on training. A lot of companies don't do adequate training, and by focusing on that, you can dramatically reduce your risk to this area. And then we also see corporate culture. And if we look at, say, see something, say something programs, where you're asking employees to report if they see something suspicious. Of course, you have to be careful with programs like that. You don't want to implement witch hunts. But you can see how heavy I am on the top two quadrants as opposed to the two bottom ones. And you could argue and you could say, hey, Rob, well, you've missed 2FA or whatever it is you want to insert in there. And yes, you could do that. But what I'm trying to show here is for pawns, there's huge potential in corporate culture and moving that towards something that's more protective of the organization, to having employees invested in that. We say security is everybody's job. Well, no, it actually isn't if the employees are not rewarded on that, right? Trying to get an employee to think security is really difficult if they're busy and it's not something their boss is telling them to do, right? So building the culture where it is, that is the trick, right, I find. And then the training, making that fun, gamifying it, making it something that they enjoy, that they're going to do and remember, and looking at certain roles that really need it, like the receptionist. How often do we train the receptionist in social engineering? Almost never, right? But yet they're the ones that are going to get it the worst, right? So I think there's lots of opportunities. Physical security training, right? How do you stop the fake pregnant woman with the big carton of coffees from drafting through the door, right? I mean, that's the classic one we all use. How do you stop that? So that's where I would focus for pawns. For turncloaks, we see it's a little bit more balanced, right? Now I'm saying maybe we should introduce more technical controls, more management controls, right? Taking a look at that, looking at how we're bringing people into the company, those better exit interviews when they're leaving, NDAs, really adding a little bit more extra layers there. More technical controls, you're not going to want to introduce perhaps all of these to every company, but maybe no BYOD, right? Denying portable media. A lot of companies I've worked at, I can't use portable media just because of the nature of the company. So perhaps we want to introduce more of those sort of controls there as we get into more sophisticated insider threats. I'm not stopping on the training and the corporate culture. I think that needs to continue to evolve as you start to look at more sophisticated insider threats. And then imposters. Now we're at the most sophisticated level of insider threats. Now I've said, okay, now I'm focusing much more on the technical controls. There's a lot more there to look at. The other thing that is not really shown here is the holistic nature of what you'd now be doing, right? So not only are we implementing much more technical controls, and you could add these earlier if your company allows. I'm just saying this is where the focus would be. And the holistic nature would be allowing those to all work together. So for your example, for your door access, and then also for your digital access, right? So if someone's trying to access physical areas that are off limits to them, and also trying to do searches for things that they shouldn't, or accessing network shares they shouldn't, then I would be looking at that as one complete package where you're able to identify insider threats. Here as well, I'm saying counter-espionage team integration. So many of your companies probably don't have enough staff just for information security, let alone counter-espionage teams, right? So how do you do that? And I know for many of us, that's not going to be possible. So you have to make do with what you've got. And I think perhaps getting training in counter-espionage for your information security focals, that might be an idea. That might help bridge that gap. But that's where we're kind of going with this. And even training, right? Now we've added another level of training. I think much of this, you never want to stop the training for any of these. Now we're going to look at detecting, one more thing. So the micro-segmentation. Micro-segmentation I would recommend for not only your network, so if you haven't looked at products like VMware, NSA, or, sorry, I forget the product, but it's micro-segmenting, just not relying on VLANs. Then detecting. So for detecting, typically what we look at is our tools. So we all have our fancy boxes with their blinking lights. And so we use that. But then we also are trying to look at behaviors, right? So those insider threat IOCs, I call them, certain behaviors that should trigger red flags, that you should make you think, oh, wait a minute, that's not right. And then bringing those together in some sort of holistic package is the trick, really, right? But extremely difficult to do. If you don't have that set up already, how do you do that? Most of us don't have a good, even like we're still trying to build our SIM or our SOC to make it work like the way we want it to, right? And having dedicated staff to do this is extremely difficult. The only really good solution that I see is corporate culture, right? So really having security is everybody's job, and really having everybody participate and be motivated to do that. So programs like the See Something, Say Something, anonymous reporting perhaps, it can't be a witch hunt, so that's the risk that you face to prevent it from that happening. But I think it's possible, and it's one of the few options that you have if you don't have the resources. Some indicators of compromise, and I think this would be more specific to management, to have them trained in looking for these sort of things. And you could have individuals having these sort of behaviors and not it be an insider threat, so you must again be careful of that. But these are the things that you would look at. If you're seeing multiple events like these happening, then I think it would warrant looking deeper into what's happening there with the individual. Tampering with access, any sort of criminal activity, of course. Concealment would be another huge red flag. Behavioral precursors, quite often there's personal things going on that you can investigate and talk to the person about. Socials, bad-mouthing the company, that's kind of the disgruntled employee, remember that? So there's many things to look at there. For employees, if you're going to implement a program, these are some of the points that I would look at to monitor. So if people are working very unusual hours by themselves, waiting until everybody leaves and then doing their stuff, vague answers, how come you're driving a Porsche all of a sudden and you only make 50,000 euros, right? Like, what's going on, and they don't want to tell you. Things like that I think people could look at. But again, we have to be careful with this. I don't know how it is over here, but I know even in North America, it would be very sensitive to question people about too many of these things, right? Then finally, how do we respond? So responding to insider threats, of course, is difficult. If you have a plan, that's what I would recommend. If you don't have a plan, make a plan right away, because you're going to have an insider threat issue, and you need to know how to respond. If you don't have a plan and you're just improvising, that's a really bad place to be. Before you respond, understand the nature of an event. So do you really understand what's going on here, what's happened and why? Because it could be a misunderstanding, and if it is, and you pursue the employee, then that could be a lawsuit, right? So you need to be very careful. Make sure you're proceeding based on evidence, right? So sometimes we need to be very patient. If you monitor and detect an insider threat, it's very easy to get very excited about that and want to proceed very quickly. But sometimes we just have to be patient to make sure we get the evidence that we need. And that kind of brings me into collaborating with the other entities that you really need. That can be human resources, definitely legal. There's some others there depending on the structure of your company. But I would definitely bring in those two, and I would recommend working with those groups as you progress and develop your insider threat program. You may also require local law enforcement from the outside to bring those in. I've done that before, and I would recommend don't do it the day of. Develop that relationship way before so that you know who to call, you know who to talk to, you know what that's going to look like. That'll save you a lot of time. And then I would say response should be continual, right? You have insider threats happening every day of some form or fashion, right? So if we go back to the very first ones, the pawns, right? They're getting emails, phishing emails around there all the time. You're getting people bring information out on their USB drives, right? I would assume in a lot of companies that's happening every day. So I think this needs to be a continual thing that we build upon. Now our strategy. So now I'm going to share with you the one-pager that I think can help you to implement some of this. So the first thing is response. So what we saw with the career and the lazy type, nobody's responding to them. Nobody's enforcing policy. So if you start to enforce policy on the simple stuff, now all of a sudden you're going to tick those boxes and protect those layers. Start with the easy stuff, which is that, right? The internal influence. There's factors that are happening with, say, the disgruntled that's causing them to turn. If we can fix that, right, and that can be through perhaps some HR programs where when people miss a promotion, they are actually talked to and consulted with and made to feel a little bit better. I know it takes energy and time, but it can really help prevent some of this risk. And then custom approaches for each of the three different types, right? So pawns, we saw education. That was a huge area. That can be cost-effective and fun. If you do the click-through stuff that I see so often, nobody retains that. Nobody likes that. It's just like click, 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 done. It's not worth the money, right? I mean, it checks a box, so you're compliant, but turncloaks, so company culture. So if you can motivate the company and govern the company to be excited about security, so it is actually everyone's job, then that's going to definitely insulate you and protect you a lot there. You got to be creative on how you do that, though. Imposters, so again, we're looking at maturity controls there. The holistic mix of technical and behavioral controls that are all integrated, right? I haven't seen that done well in many companies. And then collaborating early. So if you're interested in insider threat, if you think it's a risk to your company, and if you have anything of value, it is, then I would recommend making sure you're talking to HR, talking to local law enforcement. If you have a federal law enforcement here as well, talking to them, getting threat intel on insider threats, especially from nation states, what you should be looking for. Highly recommend that. It's super high value. So if you have anything that's creative, any important data that's valuable, someone's going to come and take it from you. They're going to try anyway, right? So that's why I believe this is so important and just not looked at as much as it should be. So I believe that's it. So I have time for Q&A, and I also have a funny story that occurred here to me with insider threat. So if we don't have any questions, I'll tell you that story. But are there any questions?
Thanks very much, Robert.
Thank you.
That was really interesting. So I think we have some questions. Let's start over here.
Hi. So what do you think
blocking access versus just monitoring it.
Can you start again? Because it wasn't on the stream.
Oh, okay. So what do you think of blocking access to resources versus just monitoring access of developers? Because from my personal experience, especially this like whitelisting certain website, using proxies to monitor stuff, this stuff is extremely unpopular, especially with developers, and you will have problems with motivation, productivity, and retention.
Yeah.
So if I would take this stuff seriously, I would probably try to go more on the monitoring side and spend money there and have people to look at that instead of blocking that. Do you think that's viable?
Yeah, I think you mentioned a couple really important things. You mentioned retention and things like that fit around company culture. And all of our companies here are going to have a different culture. So whether you're a startup or a big multinational, it's going to be different. So I think you need to, whatever I say, you need to fit it to your company. What's going to work for your company? Are you going to restrict things like microsegmentation? I'm a big fan of microsegmentation and RBAC and principles like that. So if you, for my company, I want to give you access to only what you need access to. And then I'll also monitor that. So if you try to access something that you're not supposed to so many times, then that's going to be a red flag. So I would definitely implement that. But again, we also want to make our environments as friendly and as pleasurable as possible. So I really like your question because that's just as important, I would think, for retention. So, because there's a lot of nice companies out there where it's very pleasurable to work, and you want that because it's so competitive right now. So I think the employee needs to feel like they're doing the right thing. So I think that's the trick, right? Is I'm happy with the access that I have, and I wouldn't want it any other way as an employee. So if you can get to that mental state with the employee, to me, and I don't know exactly how you would do that in your company, but to me, that's the ultimate win. So, yeah.
So, yeah, another question.
Hello, thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
I'm wondering what your opinion is on teaching the workforce about offensive techniques, not just from a defensive awareness perspective, from an actually taking an offensive role, and would that appreciate the engagement of the workforce a little more effectively?
Yeah, I have to be careful how I answer that because I know there's a lot of debate about hacking back, but I would say yes, because I think if you want to build a culture of proud protectionism, which is what I call it, where you go to work for a company and you're so happy to work at that company that you're going to defend that company. So if somebody tries to social engineer the receptionist and say, oh, I'm here to meet Joe, and you're like, whoa, wait a minute, I can take you to Joe instead of just having them wander the hallways. When you have employees like that, I think that's what you want, right? You want people that are, they're looking at it, not just defending, but they're going to reach out. And I think not in a retaliatory way, and I think that's sometimes associated with that concept, right? But I think where they're perhaps looking outside, looking at the CCTV, oh, there's a blind spot there, I'm going to go report that, or there's something suspicious. So I had an employee come in once, and they found a weird box in the parking lot. And it looked really suspicious, and they reported that. Oh, that's fantastic, right? So that's the sort of thing that I would really like to see more and more. Yeah, does that help answer the question? Yeah? Basically, I would say yes.
So, are there more questions? No, then I will be interested on your fun story.
Do I have 30 seconds for a story?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I got here a few days early in Vienna. What is it? This is, I think, the spy capital of the world, right? So I was, anybody know the pub 1516? Great pub. If you haven't been there, I highly recommend it. I was there having a couple of beers, and it was crowded, a Friday night, and the bartender said, come on in, and he put me at a table with two other fellows, and they were like, who's this person? And they just were ignoring me. It was a very weird situation. And so I bought them a round of drinks. And then they started buying me a round of drinks. So now it was like lots of drinks. And I was asking them about their companies and what they do. And they were working on some pretty cool stuff. Startups, very happy with it. And I don't like to talk about myself because I think people like to talk rather than listen. And but I guess that seemed a bit weird to them. So I think it was around 2 in the morning. They stood up and said, "You're not who you say you are. Who are you?" And they thought that I was there to interrogate them and to learn more about their company and to learn all their secrets. And I thought it was great, because if they were employees of my company and they all of a sudden suspected that this person was trying to pull information out from them, that's what I'd want them to do. So I showed them all my ID. I said, I'm who I say I am. I just don't talk a lot about what I do. I'm interested in what you do. And but I thought it was amazing. So yeah, Vienna's so cool. Yeah.
Thanks very much,
Thank you very
Robert.
much.